Well, welcome back to Ev on Everything, a show that is getting closer and closer to actually being about everything, but isn't there yet. I can tell you that the part about Ev is true. I'm Ev. That's Ev Buckley, and you can find me on Twitter at Ev Buckley. You can find the show on Twitter at Ev on Everything. And for this episode, I strongly encourage you to check that out. It's going to have multiple links to the things that I am talking about seeing and hearing. The music and art for today's episode is going to be exceptionally good, because today's episode is about something very important to me that I hold very dear. So go there and check it out and hear what I'm talking about. It was Trans-Europe Express that got me. Most people talk about Autobahn or the man machine, and some people talk about computer world when they're talking about the first impression, the thing that made them understand how great and important and influential and all of this stuff was. But it was Trans-Europe Express that got me. It was delicate and simple, and at the same time it was rich and complex. And to this day, I'm not sure I've ever heard an evocation of a physical experience in music as perfect and comprehensive as that record's articulation of train travel. It's calm and it's cacophonous, it's historic and futuristic, it's mechanical and organic. It was light and beautiful, and it captured everything from sensations of speed to scenery and distance and culture and continental scope. It seemed to be about everything to do with trains, not just being on them, but everything that they meant and signified, everything they provided to society. It was like the freedom of travel and the connections and the scope of a huge continent-spanning train network was only one thing alongside other things, human things, what you might do in those places that you go to and how you might feel. The travel was a process and an experience as well as a means to an end, and all of those things were captured together in these wonderfully straightforward but elegantly beautiful melodies. There were simple but very catchy and propulsive rhythms in keeping with clattering train tracks and, rotating machinery and things like that. But at the same time, there was a great depth to it, beautiful sonic presence to it. When I think about the greatest electronic music, the things that expanded the boundaries of the form and introduced us to all of the new potential of this amazing 20th and 21st century art form, and realized a lot of that potential, I'm supposed to think about someone like Alvin Lucier or Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, somebody like Elian Radigue or Pauline Oliveros. But instead, I often find myself thinking about this album that isn't even the most boundary-pushing thing its creators ever did. That you'd have to say would be Radioactivity or Computer World. This album is just the best music. The most perfectly realized, the most pure, the one where all the limitless potential of synthetic sound is turned back into the task of simply making something beautiful. I should probably tell you what I'm talking about, really. I'm talking about Kraftwerk. I'm talking about them because recently we lost one of the most important artists in modern music. One of the very select few people without whom, it's safe to say, almost everything would be different. His name is Florian Schneider, or Florian Schneider Esleben, and he was a member of Kraftwerk from 1970 up until sometime in the late 2000s. And I'm privileged to have seen him perform with Kraftwerk in the early days of their kind of modern period when they were still touring new music, albeit in a highly retrospective show. Kraftwerk returned to performing live tours around 2003 after a long hiatus, probably about a decade, where they would only do very, very occasional appearances. They'd released their last album of new material called Tour de France Soundtracks recently, and they were touring it. Sometime shortly after that, Schneider left the band, and it's unclear exactly when or why. That's in keeping with a lot of things about Florian Schneider. The world found out he left in 2009, but it was some non-specific time before that he stopped working with them. A lot of things about him are enigmatic, but not in a contrived kind of way. He just seems like an obscure kind of a figure, who's hard to pin down and hard to get information about. He's not secretive, there just isn't a lot out there to know about him. And right in this brief window where I had the opportunity to see Schneider perform this music that had such a profound effect on me and on the wider world, there I was. I was relatively sober, so I remember a great deal of detail. I stood through perhaps the most intimidating and thankless festival slot of all time, being the electronic warm-up act for Kraftwerk, playing to a tent so packed the crowd extended all the way out into the fields around where you couldn't even see, waiting for someone else to come on stage. Royksop had that dubious honour, and as I recall they were pretty good, but there was no possible way to enjoy it. It was not even an entree, it was something to wait through, unfortunately. It's very sad for them, but, you know, the crowd were there for Kraftwerk, they were waiting for Kraftwerk. I could see out the tent by the side entrance and all the way into the next tent over in the next venue, and on stage there I was missing Asian Dub Foundation, which was a bit of a blow. I was missing them to wait for Kraftwerk. And worse still, I had to choose between seeing Laurent Garnier and seeing Kraftwerk, which is a techno conundrum I don't think I could probably resolve, but Kraftwerk are Kraftwerk, so they won hands down. I pitched up well over an hour early, and I endured this sweaty guy rubbing a rough horsehair coat against me while he was dancing, and I was missing the music I'd actually bought the festival ticket in order to see, and I waited and waited as usual. And I believe, in return, along with a near religious experience at a Philip Jack concert around the same time, that this was the best concert experience I have ever had. And at the same time, which is not the same thing, the best concert I've ever experienced. I'm saying best a lot, and I don't like to rank music that way. So if you're like me and you find, top lists of music more like kind of prompts to think about than actual efforts at, ranking people. What I mean when I say best is there was a profound importance to this that wasn't shared with other gigs. I don't know really, it's hard to compare one musical performance to another so directly. Maybe I've been to better music than that Kraftwerk gig, maybe I've been to better concerts and performances than it. But for me it's the best one because it just has a presence and a place in my psychology that other concerts just don't. and it deserves the place musically. You know, it doesn't have the place because it was this great untouchable summer I'll never get back. It doesn't have the place because I met somebody there or had other corollary happy memories. It was the music. And right at the center of it, or perhaps stage left in Kraftwerk's kind of iconic four abreast lectern performance thing, was Florian Schneider. He's usually credited on albums with vocoders and speech synthesis. If you've listened to any Kraftwerk, you'll know how important that kind of stuff is in their music. It's constant presence throughout almost all of their albums. And it's the very first thing that I heard, this great chorus of synthetic voices singing the man machine in a rising melody. It was a moment the likes of which you might know. When you've built your expectations of something up to a fever pitch, to a degree nothing can possibly meet, and you're poised, waiting for the moment, and you're apprehensive or even fatalistic, you know it won't be as good as you think it will be. Your imagination surpasses the real world. But then it happens, and it is as good. It's better. It's incredible and amazing and profound and wondrous. The joy, nearly the ecstasy, shot through with relief and happiness. It's something that writes itself into you, inscribes its presence on yourself. These moments can't happen often. Part of their nature is in being rare pinnacles of experience. They can't come often, but Florian Schneider gave me one of those moments with that opening to that concert. And the concert went on to live up to that opening feeling. It was constantly and consistently so breathtakingly excellent that I spent a lot of it in disbelief that things could be this good, that music could be so beautifully realized, you know, that you could take something that I already knew, because I knew every moment, every minute of all of this music almost by heart, but that you could take something so familiar and just by reinterpreting it very slightly, putting a gloss on it, but executing it and articulating it so perfectly that you could turn it into this experience. And there were the visuals, this amazing video work. There were the performances. You could see electronic musicians performing on stage, and I've been obsessed with that ever since. I'm obsessed with the idea of an electronic performer, kind of the gestures that they have when they are on stage. And Florian Schneider, along with the rest of Kraftwerk, would give these tiny little gestures that seemed to me in keeping with the small, delicate controls that they're operating in order to make the music. They're turning knobs and pressing keys and buttons. They're triggering sequences and moving faders and effects and sculpting sound with these tiny little hand movements. And when you see them nod and glance and maybe half smile, Florian Schneider's famous for having this massive goofy smile that surprises people who think they know Kraftwerk when he breaks it out. And you feel like you can connect with what they're doing, which is something that's absent from a lot of electronic music. A lot of it's very inscrutable by its nature or by its execution. Florian Schneider, when you watch him perform, you could see that he's performing, and it connected you to him in a way that a lot of electronic music doesn't. I remember I knew about their robots thing. You know, obviously they famously have a big thing about robots, but I knew that they replaced themselves on stage with robots on occasion, that they'd done it in the past. But I managed to go to this gig. This was before the internet was massive and everything was spoiled for everyone all the time with, you know, video clips and testimonies and reviews. I managed to go without realizing that they were going to perform the robots with robots. And they gave me another one of these moments, 2 in the one gig, where they went off to do a interlude, not exactly a encore kind of situation, although the second part of the program was shorter. It was an interlude, and when they came back, they didn't come back. There was a back projection sheet over the stage, and lights came up behind it, and there were these silhouettes of robots. They started playing the robots, and strobes went off behind, throwing these crazy shadows of robots all over the kind of back projection. And again, I was like, come on. It can't be that they're going to use the robots right here in front of me. If I had paid more attention to all the touring they'd been doing in the previous couple of years, I would have known, of course, that's what they're going to do. But I didn't. And when the sheet dropped and revealed the robots, and the robots were these half futuristic, half retro, awkward, slow moving things, but the pounding, modern reimagining of the song The Robots was concussively powerful. Another one of these moments that I really cannot shake. The sudden swelling of joy in the crowd and the sudden realization, understanding was literally profound. It was something that was written into me and that I'm not going to get rid of. No wonder I'm now obsessed with, gesture and communication on stage. I saw one of the great masters of it, in his church sermonizing. It was really, really incredible. And I am really sad that Florian Schneider has died. He was 73. He died of a very brief cancer illness. And as is the way with Florian Schneider, we found out about it after the fact. After some people were, rumoured to know about it. Nobody knew what was going on for a few weeks. And then finally we found out once it was all over. He'd had a long retirement since 2008 or earlier, who knows? And a quiet one. He did very little except a promotional tune for ocean plastic pollution drive, which is typically in keeping with him to turn up to, a celebrity charity bash in a garish kind of pseudo tartan suit and hat, smiling and, waving to the crowd, and confounding any idea that he is this robotic music worker from the 1970s. He was always this kind of strangely goofy guy underneath everything. And that in its way is also very inspiring. It's great to have a final act in music where you realize the importance, I think, of your work and its contribution to the world. It's nice to age gracefully, as it were, because so many people don't, either churning out kind of shadow bad imitations of their better work, or very clearly on a gravy train of, nostalgia with overpriced tickets. Kraftwerk decided that they had this body of work that was literally very, very important. And the first thing they did was stop trying to add to it unless they were sure it was going to work. And when they released Tour de France soundtracks over 10 years after their previous album, it was clear that one of the things that had kept them for so long from recording was the effort to make something as perfect as the music that had gone before. And they achieved it. Tour de France Soundtracks is an absolutely incredibly beautiful album. Just like previous albums, it's simple and delicate, but also carries this great weight of sound in it. And according to Ralf Hutter, the other founder member of Kraftwerk and the author or composer of most of its songs, Florian Schneider was largely responsible for sound within the group. He called him a sound fetishist and said that he was such a perfectionist about the sound that he would insist that it was right. before he would bother doing it. He would have no interest in it if it couldn't be perfect. And if you know how perfect Kraftwerk's music is and how pristine and carefully programmed all of their sounds are, you can imagine being the guy in that band who is picked out as being the perfectionist. That's pretty perfectionist. And Tour de France soundtracks has that sheen of perfection all over it. You know, it's no longer revolutionary music, but that's only because the rest of the world caught up to what Kraftwerk were doing a very long time ago. And there's a kind of a dignity in accepting that you're not going to remake the world twice, you know? Very occasionally somebody will manage that, you know, Miles Davis or somebody like that will literally lead the avant-garde at different times in his life in different directions. But most people don't. And to refine and improve on the things that you've done before, knowing that refining and improving on them loses the profundity and the importance of what went before, but is what you're good at. That's something I think is pretty special. And if Florian Schneider was the perfectionist in the group, perhaps, and I'm kind of doing their thinking for them now, he was part of the thinking that went into taking so long to realize one final album, and it's been a final album so far, before going into a period of retrospection, of curation. So the current form of Kraftwerk is a curation of the existing body of work. You can go to see them now with Ralph Hutter and various other people, some of whom have been in the band for like 30 years. This is not hired gun territory where, you know, you go to see some legend front person with a random backing band of kids. You know, these are very, very serious Kraftwerk members. Florian Schneider was no longer there after I saw them. But there's something about the fact that they seek to curate, update, maintain, and keep relevant their back catalogue, rather than just rest on their laurels, and rather than just try to retain old glories with inferior music. Perhaps, again, I'm speculating and doing their thinking for them, but perhaps Florian Schneider's influence on the band in terms of perfecting its sound is what led in that direction. He was rumoured not to enjoy touring and that side of music life. And perhaps once that period was reached and Kraftwerk had safely transitioned into something that was retrospective without being backward looking, and was comfortably semi-retired without being resting on their laurels, and that was him done. You know? I certainly don't begrudge him his many years of apparently very happy retirement. And even though I would have liked to have seen them again with him performing, you know, he gave everything that he did to electronic music and to me and to everyone else in the world. And that is enough. If you're unfamiliar with what Kraftwerk were or are and why they're important, it's very, very hard to talk about for the simple reason that you end up in hyperbolic territory so quickly that people just assume that you are a huge fan who's overstating the case. You run the risk of over-egging the pudding of your belief in the band and your appreciation of their music and everything that they've done. It is not actually an exaggeration to say that Kraftwerk are among the most important artists in all of modern music of any kind across any genre. And that nothing in popular music or electronic music would be the way it is today without them. They very, very directly influenced the creation. I don't mean like the direction, but the foundation and the creation of hip-hop, of techno, of house, of electro and synth pop that's become so ubiquitous that we just think of it as pop now. Pop music is assumed to be something that's done with computers and synthesizers and one vocalist up front. You know, a few guitars and acoustic instruments, exactly the template that Kraftwerk laid. But nobody had done it before. And via synthetic pop music in the 1980s, which didn't exist in the 1970s, the modern pop music came directly out of that. And Kraftwerk essentially originated all of that. They weren't just sampled on hip-hop records, and they didn't just influence techno producers. They were literally the influence that opened people up to making that kind of music. They were the originators in a way that's... it's easy to underestimate what that means. You're talking about, if they hadn't made the records that they made, the people who did all of this stuff would have been influenced by something else. Sure. But there wasn't anything else like this. This had literally never been done before or since. And who knows what hip-hop would be like if it was different records that Afrika Bambaataa or whoever sampled. Who knows where we would be if, you know, Derek May, I believe, said that techno was George Clinton and Kraftwerk trapped in an elevator together. I mean, without the Kraftwerk half of that, somebody else would have influenced these people. But who and what direction would they have gone in? It certainly never would have happened the way it did. And that was Florian Schneider. You know, from the foundation of the band in the very late 60s or early 70s, all the way through until 1981 when they released Computer World. They were basically making the kind of albums that were titanically influential on all kinds of people. And that influence was firsthand for people like, you know, techno artists and hip-hop artists. But secondhand, I mean, you can't overlook the influence that they had on somebody like David Bowie, you know, who named a track on his album Heroes in honor of Florian Schneider. It's a beautiful piece of music, V2 Schneider. Imagine all the people influenced by David Bowie who look back on his 70s output and think, my God, you know, if only I could be like that. And he was listening to Kraftwerk and going, my God, if only I could be like that. The ripples that spread outward from the music that Florian Schneider was making throughout the 70s and into the early 80s are so profound, they're so constant, and they reach so far across the kind of ocean of 20th century music that it is actually possible to say that none of the music you listen to, nothing you hear on the radio after Kraftwerk would have been that way if it weren't for Kraftwerk. And that is a rare thing. So if you're familiar with Kraftwerk, you might know some of the things that I've been talking about. You might know a bit about Florian Schneider, and you might know a bit about their music and all the influence that they had on the world and culture. But maybe you're not. Maybe Kraftwerk are just a name you've heard of, and you might know one or two of the big singles like The Model or Autobahn, perhaps. If you don't know what I'm talking about or why I'm so worked up about these guys, I want you to listen to Trans-Europe Express the way I did when I was young in the 90s. Try to listen to it without reading too much about it, except for obviously the, you know, lionizing praise that I gave it earlier. And give it some time and some space. Sit down and take it easy, relax, Relax like you're on a luxury long distance train and you've got a couple of hours with nowhere to go and nothing to do. Sit down and turn it up loud. It's on all the major streaming services and you'll find it out there. And let it wash over you. Try to feel where all of these melodies and rhythms have come from. Try to enjoy the experience of experiencing the music. And even if you never come back to Kraftwerk, at least you'll have a little taste of what it was that laid the foundations of many of the pieces of music that you enjoy and listen to today. And if you want a real shock, listen to Computer World and try to imagine that it was made in 1981 before anyone had ever released a techno record, and marvel at how far into the future a band are capable of seeing musically, sonically, and lyrically. And then listen to every single other thing Kraftwerk ever made. Because Florian Schneider is one of the most important musicians of our lifetime. And I am deeply, deeply sad to have lost him. But I am going to be listening to Kraftwerk constantly for the next few weeks, enjoying all the memories that I have of their music, finding new details like I always do and new connections to the wider rest of the music world, and enjoying the great man's legacy. Anyway, you have been listening to Ev on Everything. This is a curtailed, short show that I just wanted to put out there immediately on learning about Florian Schneider's passing. So we're not going to try to do the full hour or 45 minutes today. That gives you some time to go and do your Kraftwerk listening homework, so I hope you enjoy it. If you've enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends. Please like and subscribe to the show as usual. Give it a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. Find me at Ev Buckley on Twitter, and find the show with snippets of all of the music that I've been talking about and some of the artwork and articles at Ev on Everything on Twitter. Go there and look and listen. You're going to be very, very glad that you did.